So what we're going to talk about today is what else we learned regarding the load, close, expose protocols for breeding herd stabilization for PRRS virus. As Dr. Bob said, this is a teamwork. So I was very lucky to be part of that team. My name is Daniel Linhares. Also part of the team was Dr. Jen Polcano, Dr. Montse Torre Morel, and Dr. of course Bob Morrison. Okay, and why are we saying what else we have learned regarding this project? Because as we have talked in previous meetings, we talked about time to negative pig, time it took for those herds that got infected with PRRS virus start producing negative pigs again. We have talked about time to baseline production, that is time that it took for those herds to recover productivity levels. And we talked about the success rate between, reaching the ASV category 3 status between those two herds using MLV and LVI. We also showed some economic models. So I'm going to summarize all those results in a couple of slides. And then we would like to talk about what else we learned, some other information that was not the main questions of the project, but having that nice data on our hands, we started asking additional questions, and so we looked at different outcomes. Okay, so moving forward, the study design, just to remind you guys, we were talking about herds. We were investigating. That was a 3-year project where we investigated over 60 herds, 61 herds that got infected with PRRS virus, and that decided to do load, close, expose right after the break. So we had 41 herds in the LVI program, live virus inoculation, or inoculation with serum, followed by herd closure, and 20 herds that did the same thing, but instead of using live virus inoculation, used Ingiovac MLV or ATP, so modified live virus vaccine. And for the first outcome that we're going to talk about is time to negative pig. And how did we define time to negative pig? All those herds started monitoring for PRRS virus by testing 30 piglets in pools of 5. So we had 6 pools of PCR being tested on a monthly basis. And as suggested by AASV at the time, the herds were defined to reach time to negative pig or reach the AASV category 2B when they got 4 consecutive negative results. Okay, so 4 consecutive negative results in 6 PCRs in pools of 5. And to adjust our outcomes for TTNP, for TTBP, and for the other outcomes we're going to talk about, we adjusted. It was a multivariate. We used multivariate models to adjust not the effects of other parameters, other covariates that could play a role in the outcomes we talked about. So this model, those models were run in SAS and involved. So we took all those variables that we knew that they were confounder variables, and using statistical models, we adjusted their effects, so they were no longer confounders, they were covariates in the model. Okay? So the general conclusions for that first part, we've been talking about that in the previous 3 years, was that to approach this question of load, close, expose, should I use MLV or LVI as part of the exposure program? We had different outcomes. TTNP, time to negative pig. We saw that herds that used LVI, live virus inoculation, they reached TTNP sooner, some 7 weeks sooner than those that used MLV. We also looked at productivity levels. In productivity levels, we developed some models, time to baseline production, and the total loss that the herd had during between the time of infection and load, close, expose. And we saw that herds that used MLV they were less impacted productivity-wise. They started producing, shipping out the door, the number of piglets weaned, they recovered sooner that productivity, and they had less total loss, meaning that at the end of the day, the number of pigs not weaned was less than that of LVI, right? So having those two different outcomes that were telling different story, we put those variables together in a economic model, and we saw with that considering the assumptions that we used, the TTNP, the TTBP values that we used, and using the corn prices, using the cost of production at that time, and looking at the hog market price at that time, and the purse cost that was suggested in the literature that was about $13 per pig. Using those assumptions, we saw that there was a benefit of using MLV compared to LVI in 60% of the cases, right? And we also looked at the success rate to start producing negative pigs, and the success rate to eliminate the PRRS virus or to reach the AASV category 3 status. And we saw that the success rate was similar or statistically no difference between MLV or LVI. There was a numerical difference favoring MLV, but that difference was not statistically significant. Okay, so those were the general conclusions. Other take-homes that we had and we talked about recently was that herds that achieved TTNP sooner and had less severe PRRS break when there was a prior PRRS infection in 3 years prior to study, indicating that prior immunity played a big role, meaning that herds that had prior contact with virus, they reached TTNP sooner, and they had productivity levels less impacted. And we saw that herds belonging to a particular production system did also better compared to all other herds in the database. We also saw that PRRS monitoring needs to be repeated over time, meaning just not one point in time. I have a plot here to show that it was common to have this intermittent pattern of PCR detection, meaning today it was negative, next month it was positive, and then it was positive, negative again, positive again. So there was an intermittent pattern of PCR detection showing that PRRS monitoring must be done repeatedly over time, not just one point in time, and that the monitoring scheme suggested by AASV at the time was based on 30 samples over 4 months, and that assumes that PRRS infection dies out within 90 days once prevalence is below 10%. Why below 10%? Because, of course, 30 samples only detects the infection, at least one positive, when the prevalence is above 10%. If it's below, you are likely to miss that infection. And we showed that this was not always the case. We had several examples of herds that reached the category 2B, or the TTNP, and then subsequently PRRS virus was detected after these 4 consecutive tests. So what else have we learned? So we're going to briefly talk about these 4 things here. We had a proof of concept that herds can start producing negative pigs as soon as 12 weeks post load-close expose. We're going to talk a little bit more on why MLV herds took longer to produce PRRS negative pigs. Some speculations here, some data to share with you. More on recommendation level of management practices. We're going to talk about that. And the last question, can abortions or number of abortions per week can be used to monitor PRRS infection? We're going to look at that. So if you look at the distribution here of time that it took to produce negative pigs or reach AASV 2B category, you see that distribution. This is the same thing here, just this is a cumulative distribution, and that's the regular distribution. You see here that it ranges from 12 weeks up to over 300 days or over 41 weeks. So this, and the median time was about 200 days. So bad news here is that some herds took a long time to produce negative pigs. And the second lesson was don't give up. If you were above this 200, 210, 250 days, you might still produce negative pigs. So be strict on biosecurity. Keep doing what you're doing. Data shows that up to 300 days, herds did reach negative status, right? This plot also shows that it was possible to reach TTNP or start producing negative pigs consistently as soon as 12 weeks. We have a great amount of herds here between 12 and 20 or 17, 20 weeks. So it is possible to reach, to start producing negative pigs soon, let's say. And the next question is how. So more studies need to be done on that, but the data shows that it's a proof of concept that 12 weeks, 13 weeks, 14 weeks, it's possible, right? And we showed in the study some factors associated with that short time there. We also showed several times the plots like this here, showing each line is a herd in the study, and red means positive status based on the last PCR, and green means negative. And you see that intermittent pattern of PCR detection, some herds testing negative, then tested positive again, and that happened several times in both groups, indicating that 30 samples over 4 weeks was not enough to define a herd as PRRS negative. What else does this plot show? The bad news was there was a great TTNP variability, as we said before. Good news, there were some good predictors or risk factors associated with producing negative pigs. And if you look in an optimistic view, early TTNP is possible because there was some proof of concept herds. And I really encourage studies to better investigate on make this not only an observation but science. How can we replicate that? This plot here is a way to summarize the findings. You have here LVI herds over time and MLV herds over time. When they got infected, PRRS detection, soon after PRRS detection, all the herds in this database, soon after detection, they established load-close-homogenize or load-close-expose in the herd. And MLV herds started, they recovered production levels before herds that used LVI, but they took longer time to achieve TTNP. And so what this plot here shows us was that if you do additional statistics, you see that production level was not good predictor of time to negative pigs for herds using vaccine. It didn't mean that they recovered production soon, that they were negative, that they were shipping negative pigs out the door. And if you look at the correlation between TTBP or baseline production levels and time to negative piglet, and if you look at that correlation in LVI and MLV, LVI is represented by the red dots and MLV gray dots. You see that the correlation between TTNP and TTBP for LVI herds was 0.59, which was not too bad, but it was only 0.085 for MLV, showing again that it was not time for baseline production, did not predict time to negative pig. And we were obsessed with that question, why those herds reached recovered production but did not reach TTNP, right? Soon. So we started looking at the diagnostic results. And what you see here is the last positive result. Remember that there were 6 pools of 5 samples, 30 samples in pools of 5, so 6 PCRs per month. So we were asking the question, how did that come from in the early stage of infection? It was most of samples were positive, 6 out of 6, 5 out of 6. And our question was, what happens towards the end? Does it come from 6 to 0, from 5 to 0, or from 6 to 5 to 3 to 1, 0? And how did that compare between groups, LVI and MLV? And what you see here is the last positive result, number of positive samples in the last out of 6 in the last positive result. Last positive result being defined as the last positive result that was followed by 4 consecutive negative tests. Okay, so last positive result was the positive result followed by 4 consecutive negative tests, or 0 out of 6 positive 4 months in a row. And what you see here is that for herds that used LVI, it was pretty distributed. We had herds that were tested just 1 positive in the last test, and we had herds that had 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 positive in the last test. But most of the LVI, MLV herds, they were only 1 or 2, they had only 1 or 2 positive tests out of 6, all right? So, suggesting that the prevalence of PRRS virus in the LVI, in the MLV herds towards the end was less than was lower than that of MLV, than that of LVI herds. And if you put that same data in a 3x2 table and do a chi-square test, you see that that difference was statistically significant. Another way to look at this same data is to do this plot here, starting at 12 weeks post load close exposed, time where we started monitoring the herds, until they reach the negative status, okay? And red here is LVI herds, and blue is MLV. And you see here that towards the end, the same thing, you know, it's that we saw in the previous plots, just a different way to look at that was that LVI herds, if you look only the red, it comes from 6 and then 6 positive results, or 5 or 6 positive results, and come to 0 here. While MLV, it's more like this curve is not as clear cut as the MLV herds. It goes more low prevalence, what supports the fact that more the MLV herds had a greater proportion of herds that had this intermittent pattern of PCR detection. It was positive, then it was negative, then it was positive, then it was negative. Why? Well, if you have a low prevalence like this, it's not surprising to miss one time and then the next time you don't miss it, right? So what we suggest, what we speculate, the study was not designed to look at that question, so we're not saying that it was, but what we speculate was that if you look back here in this plot, you see that MLV herds, they reached TTBP sooner than the herds that reached the LVI herds. So what does that mean is that at the farm level, the employees, the people working there, they didn't see PRRS virus there. Towards the end here, it was a long way that the herds, the productivity level was recovered, right? There was no signs of PRRS virus there clinically. And many times the PCRs were coming back negative or with only 1 positive result. Remember, that was this intermittent pattern of PCR detection. So what we thought was that, well, if you don't see PRRS virus clinically in the herd, and if you got 1 or 2 PCR negative tests, you just assume PRRS is not there and relax on biosecurity. So our take home on all this is that be really strict on biosecurity, on your management practices, and all the procedures you do to control and to eliminate PRRS virus until you really have science to support and diagnostic to support that PRRS is not there anymore. Because here it's approved, what this plot here really shows is that PRRS can be there for a long time, and if you don't test enough, you won't find it, and if you don't find it, it's going to be there for a long time. So moving forward here, we're talking about management practices. So this Y here is what we're just talking about here, right? And talking about management practices, the third phase of this project was to compare some risk factors associated with time to negative pig or to success rate to eliminate PRRS virus from the herd. And so we investigated 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 management practices suggested by a task force, ASV task force, as being the crucial management practices that a herd undergoing PRRS elimination should implement, right? So we had all these management practices. In a survey, we asked the veterinarians what they recommended to those herds undergoing elimination to implement. And we compared the TTNP quartiles, just thinking, was there any management practice associated with shorter or longer TTNP? So let's compare the quartiles. So blue here is first quartile, or in other words, the herds that reach TTNP sooner, and the red one is the median, so median TTNP, and Q3 is the ones that reach TTNP later in the elimination process. So what the plot really shows you here was that there was no clear association here between the recommendation level of those practices and time to produce negative pigs at weaning. I'm going to show some other slides on management practices, and I have here A, B, C, D, and up to J here. I could have here the management practices per se, but the purpose of the study was not, we didn't have power. The study was not designed to really look at the specific management practices. So the idea here is just to see if there was, what was the level of recommendation, what was the perception of the different vets and the different system on what was really important in terms of management practices to control PRRS virus. So we're not going to stick in any specific practice. And we did the same thing here, comparing the ones that failed to achieve category 3 or the negative status, the ones that reached category 3, ASV category 3, and the ones that censored, the ones that dropped out from the study for different reasons. And again, we didn't have any clear association here of management practices with ability to reach category 3. From all the risk factors that we looked at several risk factors. Can show the table later if you're interested. The only risk factors that were associated with ability to eliminate PRRS virus was being infected with this 144 kind of virus and not holding pigs back for quality. Okay? So let's... This plot here shows the recommendation level of each practice. Each color is a practice, and each circle here is a herd. And what I wanted to show here was just the divergence between the different herds, the different systems. Each herd was implementing or not recommending a different set of practices. There was not a consensus between the vets on which practice was more important. Each one had their own idea of what was important. So we have this color graph here. So what was the real effect of those management practices on the outcomes? We really don't know because we looked only at recommendation level, not implementation level per se. We didn't audit those herds. We just asked the vets, what did you recommend? So these results are subjected to those kind of bias here, compliance level between each system, between each herd, the leadership in each practice, each farrowing room, people involved, and interaction of PRRS virus with other bugs could also have affected. Okay. The last questions what else we learned from this project was this question here: abortions per week. Is it really a good PRRS indicator? Can we use number of abortions per week in a sow farm as an indicator of PRRS infection? So how to track this number of abortions and how to define spike or wave or epidemic of abortions? I'll show you. I'm sure there are different ways to do that. I'm going to show here how we did that. So if you get production records for different farms, you have some, and if this is here over time, number of abortions per thousand sows, you have a plot like this here, and this wave here can be either, the spike has different magnitudes in different herds. And one way to look at that is just look at this plot, and this is pretty obvious that PRRS infection was here, but it's not always clear-cut like this, okay? So we used our same statistic process control charts that we use for TTBP, and we defined a baseline. So if you put you define the baseline using this statistical process control charts and generate statistical process control charts to help you to define when the spike or when the number of abortions really came out of control statistically. And here you can see that the control limits is those blue lines here. In this case, 0 is time that PRRS was detected in the herd, and at time here, let's say 4 or 3 or 4 weeks later, there was a statistical evidence that number of abortions came out of control, and that some weeks later it recovered. And so that's a way to define out of control. Instead of just looking at this plot here and trusting your eyes, you rely on statistics and standardize the definition of epidemics or out of control event, right? So we built this chart for 48 farms, all that we had the data. And as expected, there were different patterns of abortions, waves in SPC charts. And once more, SPC charts proved to be a good tool to define out of control. Not only your eyes, I think it's this. I analyzed 40 herds, and the first herd, maybe at the first glance, it was not statistically out of control, but then after you analyze a bunch of other herds, if you come back to that and trust only your eyes, you may have a different conclusion. But if you have a standardized procedure, statistical procedure, then you get rid of those bias and use statistics to help you define if it was a spike or not. So we had different shapes of the curve. We had herds that did not went out of control, and we had herds that were out of control in the first week of PRRS detection. We had herds that went out of control after load close expose. So we had different patterns of these abortion waves. And the next slide summarizes. So 81% of the farms had number of abortions out of control between 2 weeks prior to PRRS detection and 4 weeks from PRRS detection. So 81% of the farms had this statistically significant spike of number of abortions. But we had 9 out of 48, 19% of the farms did not have this out of control abortions. And as any other clinical manifestation, we know that's not surprising. Why it's not surprising? Any clinical manifestation of any disease is an interaction between the agent, in this case PRRS virus, immunity level, and the environment, right? So having said that, I'd like to acknowledge again the group. This was my PhD thesis committee. This work that we showed, it's a great part of my PhD. Some 60% of my PhD was on this project. And all the veterinarians, producers that helped us along the way, the University of Minnesota faculty, and of course the funding to these projects. Most of it came from BI, the Swine Disease Eradication Center at the University of Minnesota, and also National Pork Board.